Hi, we're the Cardboard Box Item, and let us start by rowing back on that clickbait title immediately. Video game music isn't dead. Far from it, in fact. There are still amazing soundtracks being made today, in a variety of styles and from a more varied pool of developers, particularly in the indie space. I listened to the Dusk soundtrack more than any other album last year, before I even played the game itself. Signalis made synths frightening again, with a horror score that rivals the best in the genre. Modern tech allows for music to be more dynamic in games, reacting and changing based on the player's circumstances, and the overall budget for game development has also increased, allowing for the use of more live instrumentation. So if game music is so great, what's my problem then? Well, the metaphorical pain in my arse is big budget AAA games. The score for most huge mainstream games are, in my opinion, bland, unmemorable, and seem to feel the height of creative ambition is to replicate movie blockbuster soundtracks. They all blend into one bombastic mush, where loud percussion and droning synths are favoured above catchy melodies or exciting tonal shifts. Most of the examples of good modern soundtracks I've given so far are from smaller games. These tend to have less money and people involved, but can be more focused as a result. And they often have reduced graphical detail and less of an emphasis on realism than AAA games. This gives the music more room in the player's perception as they play. I'll come back to modern game soundtracks later, but first, let's look at the main character of this video. So why am I picking on little old Metal Gear Solid 2? Surely it can't be blamed for all my issues with modern game music. What about Halo? That came out only 2 days after Metal Gear Solid 2 and had a big, epic movie-like soundtrack. Well, 2001 does seem like a turning point for game scores, and games in general. Budgets were getting bigger, the cultural relevance of games had increased, and the polygons had become more shapely. So games were in a position to imitate film, for better or worse. And no game typifies this more than Metal Gear Solid 2. The making of MGS2's score is fascinating and a little convoluted. After the success of Metal Gear Solid in 1998, Kojima and his team had a larger budget to work with and were looking to Hollywood for inspiration. According to a behind-the-scenes documentary released with the PAL version of MGS2, the story goes like this. Hideo Kojima and Kazuki Muraoka, the sound director of MGS2, went to see a Hollywood action film one night, The Replacement Killers. They were so enamored with the film's score that they sent a CD of their favorite tracks to Harry Gregson Williams, the film's composer, with an offer to work on their next game. Harry was just starting to break into bigger film soundtracks around this time, and he had never done a video game score. But he rolled up his sleeves and got stuck in nonetheless, and the rest is history. But there's another differing account of this. According to an interview from September 2021, they originally wanted to get Hans Zimmer to make the soundtrack. Hans is the superstar composer of Gladiator, Interstellar, Dune, and more. But Hans was too expensive, so they went with one of his colleagues at his studio, Media Ventures, the up-and-coming Harry Gregson Williams. And Hans did not offer a ton of encouragement for this new venture, saying that Gregson Williams should watch out, as he is here to try and build a path to being a film composer, as opposed to a games composer. Hans may also have been the one who told Kojima to put that 90-minute cutscene at the end of Metal Gear Solid 4, but that's difficult to confirm because I just made it up for this video. So the story of how Harry Gregson Williams came to be involved in the project is murky, but it was clear that Kojima and his team wanted a particular sound for their game, one that evoked modern action film soundtracks rather than the 8-bit origins of game music. And honestly, it was 100% the correct choice for this game. To illustrate why, let's compare some of the music from the original Metal Gear Solid on PS1 with the MGS2 soundtrack. The same main theme is used in both games, but to very different effects. Here it is in Metal Gear Solid 1. This has an upbeat tone that's a little at odds with the game's vibe. It's more in the realm of a slightly cheesy TV show theme song than a conspiracy thriller film score. Think Airwolf more than The Bourne Identity. It's dramatic, high energy, and a little camp, and it slots right into the musical stylings that typified game music at this time. There are some other pieces in this score that better suit the atmosphere of the game, like the Celtic ambience of The Best Is Yet to Come. But the main theme perfectly reflects MGS1's place in gaming at this time. It should also be noted that this theme has been absent from the series since Metal Gear Solid 3 because of similarities to a piece by the Russian composer Georgy Sviridov. But I digress. The track's synthetic instrumentation and sampled beats are typical of game music during this generation, and this would have sounded like the cutting edge to 1998 ears. The beat also reflects the influence of drum and bass on game music at this time. It was hard to pick up any game on the PS1 without it sounding like a Goldie 3am DJ set. The orchestration is making attempts to sound real, but it undeniably still has the smell of 8-bit from it, being limited by the technology of the time. But what if they didn't have these limitations? Let's look at the same theme from Metal Gear Solid 2. The quality of recording and use of real orchestral instrumentation makes it immediately sound very different. It sounds glossy, high budget, and very like a film score. The strings and brass are all captured at a much higher fidelity, so sound warmer and less thin than the PS1 version. The drums, while still having that breakbeat feel, have definitely shifted towards a more cinematic sound, being joined by thunderous timpanis that were a signature of Harry Gregson Williams' work. They achieved their initial goal. It does sound a lot like a Hollywood movie score. The composition is also updated to suit the tone of Metal Gear Solid 2 and reflect the themes of the game. The opening electronic noise ties to themes of digital information sharing, drums and strings linked to the action movie elements. The next section has a sneaky espionage feel. And it all ends on a slower version of the main melody with marching drums and epic brass, which conveys a patriotic and militaristic feeling. MGS2 has many competing themes, and for the music to reflect them so succinctly is no mean feat. Impressive stuff. These musical elements recur throughout the rest of the game's score and give a sense of cohesion, which is great, but it also leads to a lack of variety. The drum programming in Crew's Quarters is fantastic, and the whole piece is just some great sneaking music. But the rest of the atmospheric tracks in the tanker section sound quite similar and therefore lack any character in themselves. The theme from Olga's boss battle doesn't stand out in terms of musicality from the rest of the score, but it does highlight an interesting element that is exclusive to game music. During the fight, the track can change depending on if Olga has a visual on you or not, which is an example of an adaptive score. Since Gregson Williams didn't have experience working in an interactive medium like gaming, he relied on the Japanese team to use his audio stems to make something that was adaptable enough to work during gameplay. Gregson Williams relied heavily on several collaborators from Konami for the game, like Rika Muranaka, who set up orchestral recording sessions and composed the closing track, and Norihiko Hibino, who filled out roughly half of the game's soundtrack, most notably the more jazz-influenced pieces such as Fortune's Team. This piece sits apart from the rest of the score in a slightly awkward way, but it does make it all the more interesting for it. In general, the music really shines in Metal Gear Solid 2 when it's throwing in more left-field elements, or not being afraid to stand out. Moments like the choir from Opening Infiltration, which has a synthetic edge that hints at the AI shenanigans of the game's closing moments, or the drum and bass mixed squeal of Yell Dead Cell, which is an adrenaline shot needed for some of the more frantic boss fights. These highlights are fantastic, as good as video game music has ever been, and the entire soundtrack is burned into my brain from replaying it constantly as a kid. But as you get further into the game, it becomes clear that the music is being used more and more as a background ambient element, rather than a focal point for the player's attention. This is a change that had already happened in film, with most modern films employing a directive of, as John Carpenter put it, the music acting as wallpaper for a scene. What this means is that the music underscores the scene, sitting back and never becoming too distracting. Even dialogue-spare sections like chase scenes suffer from this. Take this example from a 60s classic, North by Northwest, and we'll compare it to a film made 40 years later. The score's character, memorable melodies, and, most importantly, informs the tone of the scene. In contrast, here the music can barely be heard above the sound effects, and what is there seems anonymous. This is not to say that modern film is inherently inferior to movies of the past, although technological advancements do seem to coincide with the watering down of film scores. Instead, it's true to say that the priority for a filmmaker is no longer to have the music contribute to the audience's emotional reaction to a scene. It's just one small part of an aesthetic assault, the Instagram filter on your picture of an overpriced lunch. Games have gone on a similar journey. Due to the technical limitations of the time, games of the past did not have visuals that could communicate all the emotional or storytelling beats that the creators wanted. So they would use music to set a tone, or to underpin a twist. Jump forward to today, and we have fully voice-acted, mocapped, and almost lifelike digital characters who can emote as well as any lifetime movie actor. And we can add atmosphere to a scene or level using any number of visual options. Huge vistas, weather effects, very on-the-nose graffiti, all of which can undermine the need for the score to set the tone for an area. For Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima and his team wanted to replicate modern action films, so naturally they would also reflect the diminished role of music in their game. And this trend only became more popular in games as the years went by. Following the release of MGS2, it became more common for games to adopt a similar approach, with studios hiring Hollywood composers more often, including cheeky boy Hans Zimmer for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. And the score moved further into the background, becoming homogenized and lacking the catchy immediacy of the form's previous years. To illustrate this, let's steal something from film once more. The essayist Tony Zhao made a video on the same topic in movies back in 2013, and he asked some punters to hum older classic theme songs, and then do the same for modern Marvel films. Let's do something similar here. I've made a video questionnaire and asked some people to film themselves participating. There's a link to the video in our description if you would like to have a go yourselves.
Let me get all my puffs in.
Na 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 na.
boom, 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 boom.
Du-du-du-du-du-du-du-du.
Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Du-du-du-du-du-du-du. Da-da-da-da-da-da. It starts off with a drum roll. Dun, 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 dun. Du-du-du-du-du. No, that's Metal Gear Solid.
This one I played only once. No, I don't remember. Sorry.
God, it's gonna be like Hans Zimmer or something like that. Bum, 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 bum.
No chance.
God, no idea.
Nah, not really. Not really. Don't really remember.
I don't know. I don't know what this one is.
I have no idea. But this also be like Hans Zimmer, Michael Bay music. So it'd be like, you know,
Obviously, this isn't a very scientific survey, but it's still clear that modern game teams don't stick in your head as much as older teams. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but it does reflect that the way music is utilized has changed. Listen, we can't generalize and say that all game music is bland, even in the AAA sphere. Red Dead has become the home of the most exciting Western music in years, which pays tribute to the masters of the genre but also adds its own spin to the formula. Also, the From Software games are very smart in when they deploy music for maximum emotional impact and memorability. And as we mentioned at the top of this video, indie games are killing it. There seems to be less of an expectation for them to conform to a standardized industry sound, so they can go in any direction they want, and they aren't constrained by the need to hire an entire orchestra, to the point where one of the best scores in recent memory was composed by one guy, who also made the rest of the game. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a postmodern gaming masterpiece, which had some top-of-the-range visuals, an audacious main character switch, and some fantastic music too. But it also opened a door which many other game makers gladly walked through. In chasing the allure and legitimacy of Hollywood films, games may have lost some individuality. Game scores used to be simple in form, but perfectly suited to the medium itself, humble and catchy, and definitely punching above their weight. Now, their own mother wouldn't recognize them. They've become a bunch of bland underscore rat tails that tangle together to form a homogenized rat king, scuttling around and making tons and tons of money. But hey, maybe I'm the dickhead and should stop living in the past. After all, the Grammys, who have never got anything wrong, have recognized modern gaming scores and shown them the respect they deserve.
And the Grammy goes to Assassin's Creed Valhalla.